This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warrenshaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. NBA All-Star. I don't want to even call it weekend. This is a NBA All-Star Day or NBA All-Star Night, I guess, is like vastly upon us. But I think probably the more important thing is, you know, we have found ourselves a little bit more than halfway into this season with minimal and not severe circumstances of where this pandemic has affected the capacity for us to have an NBA season. And knock on wood, man, that's a good thing. And so that means obviously we're being hopeful on the other side of this for some exciting basketball to be played in the second half of the season. And with that being said, man, let me go ahead and roll out the red carpet to my right-hand man, www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC, my brother from another mother, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Mr. Shaw, what's good? Knock on wood. The games are being played. We may actually be able to get through this NBA season, but I don't want to jinx it just yet.
Yeah, you can't jinx it. And the second half of the season was announced earlier in the week. So, but already there's going to be some changes as a couple of postponements have been announced as we're getting ready here to record as well too. So it's touch and go, man. You just got to see it and take day by day, see how it's all going to play itself out. But I think, as you alluded to, it should work itself out. But there's some days and things that may need to be extended a little bit. But hey, man, the NBA continues to push on, and I'm looking forward to this play-in tournament in May and then seeing where everything goes from there.
Yeah, I believe that this was going to be expected. That the NBA would have to have been very flexible in its capacity due to the circumstances of what we're dealing with in order to be able to roll out an effective and really a quality-like type of season. Now, listen, it's not going to be how it was in its past when obviously the NBA was on the rise and be able to take advantage of things because they laid out the groundwork earlier on. This is, again, a makeshift that's going on. And even to the degree about what's going to happen for NBA All-Star Night, right? Like, you know, we used to make a big deal of it being a weekend, but obviously we can't have crowd gatherings. It's very minimal, so everything has been confined to it being one day. This probably is more beneficial for the players because they don't have to expend themselves through the course of a weekend and can truly take advantage of a little downtime before they have to rush right back into the second half of the season. But I think ultimately the goal here is the ability for the NBA to show us, the league to show us that there is flexibility and versatility in the way that they're trying to roll out this season. And I think that bodes well, that if they are successful in doing this, that it obviously opens up the door for innovation moving forward. And not only just the game itself, but also with fan engagement. And when that opportunity presents itself for fans to enter into the arenas and the venues and things of that nature, that they'll actually have more in their think tank, so to speak, on how they can continue to lay things out and not lose footing over this past year and a half.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of those things you touched on is definitely the fan engagement, right? And more teams are starting to allow people into the arena. You know, the Heat started doing it a couple weeks ago now. I just saw an announcement that the Celtics will be sometime in March or like right after the All-Star break that they'll start allowing people back. So even if it's 1,500, 3,005, whatever those numbers are, just a little bit of home court advantage and just kind of, like you said, just engagement to try to get the game back to what it once was. And we're still a very, very long way away from that. Kind of touching even back though on the schedule release, you know, nothing goes without incident, right? And players and teams are still kind of pissed off already that they're on the schedule. There's a lot of 5 games in 7 nights type things and, you know, more back-to-backs and they obviously would like, but the schedule is already pushing into June, July, right? In terms of actual postseason play. So to get done by the Olympics, it's going to be a sprint. But I do think some more contingencies are going to need to be in place and some things are going to maybe not look as great for the NBA products. I think, you know, we had those 5 games in 7 nights. More people are going to want to rest, you know, as they try to prepare themselves and prepare their bodies. And, you know, God forbid if anyone gets COVID and all that, you know, that can still impact. So there's still a lot in the balance, but things are in most ways trending in the right direction.
I'm really curious to ask you this. And by the way, guys, look, we have a night, you know, really good show on tap. You know, we got a a lot of things that we're going to definitely cover. But I am curious about something before we move forward in what you just said, Shaw. I'm curious from you. Are you someone who is for the propensity of games being played over the course of an NBA week? So the 5 out of 7 to me is a little too much. I don't think we've ever really had something like that. Maybe like the last, in the last decade, they've been trending in a direction to minimize back-to-back games or, multiple games, in a short stretch. That's how everything has been trending. The CBA negotiations have been putting that in its play. But I'm just curious from your perspective, and you and I are of this generation, do you like the fact that we are lesser and lesser in that realm of players not being able to play multiple games over a certain stretch of days?
Well, I think we all understand the need for rest and recovery, and the league has done a great job, as you alluded to mitigating some of those schedule deficiencies that existed for years and years. There were a lot of 4 games in 5 nights, and multiple back-to-backs, and every year you see them reduce that and change the way that the travel is kind of negotiated for each team. So I commend them. I think this year is unique. There is a bit of a squeeze here, and the Players Association, in addition to the league, had to know that this would be the result of it, especially with the first half having to make up games in the second half of the season, to get a play-in tournament, a playoff, and ultimately an NBA Finals scheduled. So it's par for the course. While I don't necessarily subscribe to the notion that, hey, they should be doing this, I don't know what other choice they have other than to extend the season even further, which may end up now taking it into August, which the league doesn't want to do with the Olympics, and so forth and so forth. So it's a catch-22, and it's a no-win situation, I think, for the league, especially when it comes to its revenue. And then the TV rights, all this is all business decisions right now. So as I said, I think how teams will mitigate this is that they'll have to rest players, especially if they have some of those grueling stretches at 5 and 7 or 4 and 5 or whatever it ends up actually being.
All right, good points. I'm just of the ilk that as much as I know that we are trending in that direction, and we will, obviously try and maybe get to some kind of point where it's like every other day maybe a game is being played or whatever. I used to like the idea that they used to play like 2 games, out of 3 days, or maybe 3 out of 5 or something like that. Like there was just something about that. I just felt like the flow of the NBA and the watchability aspect of it, there was something good from seeing that. And the lesser that we see of that is the more emphasis is on the entertainment factor and all of the things that go on in the production of showing us an NBA game. And I don't want to see the NBA lose its footing on that. All right, so we got a few things going on, and as always, man, we appreciate you and yours for hopping on board with us. This week, our focus will be on the Toronto Raptors. This is a team that, man, I know a couple of weeks ago, Shaw, or maybe a month ago, Shaw was talking about, I don't know, man, this team looks like they're dead in the water. They are, a team that is facing, quote unquote, extinction, but never doubt the North. Never doubt any reptilian that is representative of the dinosaur family, because they will last forever. They are the Jurassic Park. They are the North. And obviously now they are playing some really, really great basketball. But is that fool's gold? At the end of it, are they still a legitimate basketball team with the propensity to be able to challenge some of the elite teams there in the East? We'll talk about that in our subject of the breakdown. As always, be sure to get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA. Get at me at GameFaceLee, the show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. Available on all the major platforms. Just look for the Baseline in whatever platform you use to listen to podcasts and shows, and allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all things happening in the association. You can also catch us for our online radio listeners every Tuesday, 1 p.m. on Dash Radio via the Nothing But Net Radio Network, so be sure to keep us on lock there. If you like our shows, man, as always, we encourage you to go to www.thebaselinenba.com. That is our home base where you can listen to this and all of our previous shows. A great episode that we just did, having a great sit-down conversation, doing a little FaceTime with the Baseline with the great associate head coach, Alvin Gentry of the Sacramento Kings. So please, by all means, go ahead and check that out, man. It was a great sit-down conversation, and you don't want to miss out on that. All right, so let's get into some news and notes happening. Obviously, NBA All-Star is happening in a few days' time frame. The All-Star reserves have been laid out, Shaw. What are your thoughts regarding the reserves? You feeling it, not feeling it?
Yeah, so I'm good on it actually. I think where I want to even maybe have a conversation is, were there truly any snubs this year? Because in that vein, that would say that somebody who made it didn't deserve to make it. And I don't feel like that's the case. I don't think there are any undeserving all-stars on the roster on either side this year. The expansion of the roster, if there was ever a year that probably could have happened and should have happened, especially with how the league is playing itself out, amidst COVID and just kind of throwing this all-star day together, I think this was the year. Like, why not expand it, to 15 or whatever it is? Like, I just don't understand. So for me, I'm happy with everyone that made it, even now as Devin Booker and Domantas Sabonis have made it as injury replacements. One interesting note, I think, that came out of Miami was Jimmy Butler was actually supposed to be selected ahead of Sabonis, but Jimmy was like, I'm not going if Bam ain't going. So ultimate leader and teamwork, showing there from Jimmy, and he continues to ingratiate himself, into the Miami community and even the NBA community at large. But I don't think there are any snubs out there. What about you? Even though there are guys that I would have loved to have seen get on the team.
Yeah, I think we're taking a different outlook on, in years past, because it's so challenging, right? But I think part of the reason why I don't think that there's so many snubs is because the level of competition and the closeness in the gap of games, as far as from the top to the bottom. I mean, obviously we know who are the more dominant teams in the East and the West, but I think that there is definitely a log jam, and there's so many players who are affecting the way that we are assessing who's in and who might not be in. So it's like so close, right? I think that, maybe some years apart, we can have that conversation, expanse it, because it goes into, well, the guy's playing on a losing team, and therefore, do we count that against him when he clearly has proven that he is putting up all-star numbers? Like, it's an individualized way that you're looking at a player and the talent that he is showing us through the course of an NBA season so far. I don't think that there are really any snubs here, Shaw. I do think, though, to your point, how you mitigate that in a season like what we're seeing here is the roster should have been expanded. And more importantly, this would have been a grander opportunity. Again, this is where I think sometimes the NBA drops the ball on this. This would have been a grander opportunity to allow some of those guys to be on display on primetime television. We don't normally get that kind of play because the teams are not playing on primetime TV on the networks that the NBA has negotiated these TV deals with. So like the Andre Drummond, even though he's already known, still he's putting up numbers that are kind of all-star worthy, and it's enabled to be put in a spotlight for the Cleveland Cavaliers, or even Colin Sexton. That's what I mean. It's just, to me, there could have been a better way to display and redefine the intent of what you say when we talk about all-star. I understand it's privileged. Not everybody is supposed to be on it, but there have been some talented guys that do put up those numbers to kind of set that marker, and I think this was kind of more of a miss on the NBA's ability to lay that out for us for this season specifically.
Yeah, so let's get into that. I mean, Andre Drummond is definitely a name to throw out there. I think it's interesting because most people would not have even been thinking about him, but with his role now being basically kibosh, where he's not even playing for Cleveland right now, there's probably no path for him to even sniff the All-Star. But a guy like Trae Young, has a lot of people obviously up in arms. The team we're going to talk about in the Raptors here, Van Vliet, Siakam, even Lowry to a lesser degree, they have cases. You can make those cases for them. Mike Conley has got to feel some type of way on the West Coast. Harden, leaves. Harden, Westbrook, guys like that who traditionally at the guard spot make it ahead of him. They both leave the Western Conference, and he still can't get on with a team has the best record in the NBA right now, in the Utah Jazz. So there's some hard decisions that were made. We talked about Butler and Adebayo already. DeMar DeRozan from San Antonio. The Spurs are somewhat surprisingly very good this year, and he's a key component of what they're doing. So there's people who didn't make it who have cases, but I just don't like, all right, who do you take off? And I'm so happy that I didn't think it was going to happen, but Zach LaVine and Julius Randle both making it as first time All-Stars in the Eastern Conference. Didn't see it coming, but I'm happy because they both are deserving.
I will say this, and I don't want us to spend a gazillion amount of time on this part of it, but I will say this. I am a little disappointed that, again, Ben Simmons has some nice numbers, But I think you can make the argument that Tobias Harris should actually be in there and not Ben Simmons. I think that if you're talking about why the Philadelphia 76ers are as good as a basketball team that they are, I know people are going to be pointing to the fact that Joel Embiid is top MVP candidate right now and things of that nature. You've heard where my perspective is. I'm skittish on whether or not he can continue to hold what he's doing. But if the schedule plays second half where it favors his ability to maintain his stamina and his ability to play at this higher level throughout the course of the season, I mean, there's really no argument he's going to be one of the top two people probably in the runnings for that MVP candidacy. But the fact that we're not talking about what Tobias Harris has been doing, and you had mentioned it as well for the guys putting up basically like career numbers right now, and that he's not an all-star, but Ben Simmons is. I just kind of have a problem with that. Again, we can use that as a means of saying, all right, that's a snub, but I think we already knew going in there that the Sixers were going to have at least two players, I maybe have thought was going to be more three players that was going to be considered for all-star, and the fact that we're talking about Simmons more so than we're talking about Harris kind of irks me a little bit.
I can see that, and I think it's just the antiquated, unwritten rules of selection in terms of, guys who have technically made it before, a Simmons falls into that, and where Tobias doesn't, but it is, like I said, it's interesting that they overlooked, I won't say overlooked, they just didn't select Trae Young, for Levine and Randall. And that's definitely a decision. That's a choice. So this was a year. Vucevic making it too on an Orlando team, that's horrendous, but he's been the only shining light. So there's a lot. The Eastern Conference, I think, was a lot harder this year, and there were a lot more deserving candidates than in previous years. But yeah, I think this conversation could definitely go on. It could have been a whole show, but we're going to move on here. But yeah, again, I love this.
I will say this
all played out.
We need to put this in the parking lot, Shaw. We're going to probably have to have a conversation of the guys who have posted numbers that you would say, man, they're not even in the ballpark of being considered as all-stars. And at what point do we start looking at this and start remeasuring this up, against their colleagues, as far as saying what is it going to take for them to be a part of the all-star family, so to speak? Like, when was the last time we talked about Karl Anthony Towns, right? Like, when was the last time that when we talk about DeAndre Ayton, right? What's it going to take for guys like those to be in those kind of considerations when we're looking at what we're seeing here, the numbers that these guys are doing right now? It's easy for us to be talking about who didn't make it that we know they put up the numbers to position themselves, like, Chris Middleton, right? Like, so I'm just curious. We're going to have a conversation about the guys that are like on the precipice that continue to keep missing out. Like, what is it going to take for them to actually start getting that shine?
Yeah, I love it. I love the Middleton addition there. Definitely overlooked by me. So it's hard, and we'll have to come up with a formula, some sort of voting system that maybe can potentially work. Maybe we'll pitch it to the NBA and see what they say.
All right, Shaw. So let's go ahead and talk about some other important news and notes going on. So obviously, earlier this week, the Minnesota Timberwolves decided to part ways with Coach Ryan Saunders, and immediately after that, they wind up hiring assistant head coach Chris Finch to be the head coach for the Minnesota Timberwolves moving forward. And this obviously is not something that happens every day. Usually you fire a coach and there's an interim head coach who takes over for the remainder of the season, and then they go through management goes through its deliberations about who they're selecting. So obviously this raised a lot of alarm bells in the NBA community. Particularly noted is the fact that it seemed that the Minnesota Timberwolves already had in place the idea that they wanted to bring Chris Finch on, which then begs the bigger question: is the hiring process that some of these organizations do, are they doing what they do in order to circumvent the ample opportunities that should usually be afforded for any candidate, not being white, to have a chance to be able to be considered as a head coach? And so when you see what the Minnesota Timberwolves do, obviously it raised a lot of alarm bells amongst the African-American community, especially the players, athletes, and all kinds, that, again, as good as a person Chris Finch may be, It's another miss, and it's a black eye again a little bit on the NBA, and it's overseeing the process of making sure that there is a fair, equitable means of candidacy selections that's just not limited to who you know, but what you know.
Yeah, I don't. This could become extremely political. NBA Coaches Association issued out a statement about what Gerson Rojas did in Minnesota and all of that. Potentially, I don't want to use the word overlook, but not considering David Vanterpool, who was already there, and being an African American head coach as well too. Was pretty well regarded around the league. I don't know if Vanterpool wants to be kind of like the face of this whole situation, or as hey, they passed me over. Like, I don't even know what he feels about it, but it is interesting. The league still has some image issues, especially in some various areas of the world. But Minnesota, for all reports in terms of the Timberwolves organization, they've been very responsive, in their community when it comes to some of the things that even happened in their area that we don't necessarily need to go over. But this organization is taking strides, at least in the community aspects, but can they do it in-house? This also now coming off the heels, we didn't even get to this in news and notes, but the Utah Jazz and Dennis Lindsay are facing, allegations of, misconduct, if you will, I think, to Elijah Millsap and some statements that might have been made to him, as a result of his race and ethnicity. So things are not peachy, and I think the league is doing a good job of kind of, I don't want to say sweeping it under the rug, but it's not at the forefront.
Is that a good job though?
I'm in terms of media management, like that, and that's what I mean. So in terms of, like I said, because it's a story, but it's not like people are hollering and clamoring from the rooftops about it. And maybe they should be, especially if these things and inequalities are actually taking place. So that's where, you just kind of like the mainstream media is like, all right, maybe they're tired of these issues of equality, but they're not going away. And the league, as good as it's been in general, is not immune to having these types of situations going on.
I think the one thing that I took from what was going on is that, okay, while we are fighting so many things that I think are on a much bigger level as it pertains to racial equity and opportunity, and in criminal justice, I think is so paramount and more important, right? Like the preservation of life for Black people here, right? It's, to me, the most important thing. But it's things like this that incrementally make us continue to question whether or not we have made strides and made progress to it. So I will put it in that kind of context. Is it the bigger picture for the NBA to be worrying about these things? I don't want to say no, because the NBA has been dealing with this already. But I will say, though, that this, again, puts a marker on the stagnation of getting to that point. So if the NBA is going to take strides in being more community oriented, let's understand what the makeup of that community is and whether or not you are making sure that the organizations that represent the face of the NBA, that is a part of that NBA family, are adhering to policies and changes that are putting the NBA in that direction, so to speak. Because when things like this do occur, it makes us say, all right, it looks like the wheels have started to turn slowly again. We're not moving forward. It seems like we're stagnating again. And again, these are two separate things. We don't want to be questioning the qualifications of Chris Finch, and we certainly do not want to be diminishing the NBA's intent to get to a place where we don't have to question these things. But when things like this do occur, it does raise those alarm bells up, because it makes it seem like the NBA is kind of playing it both ways. Like, they want to still have their cake and eat it too, in the sense that ownership is going to do what it needs to do, and the NBA won't hold those teams accountable when they do things like this. But they have no problem holding players accountable and agents accountable when they do things that seem to go at the interest of the players and against the interests of the owners. And so it's just interesting how that kind of plays itself. But hopefully, Adam Silver is watching this, and I think he's going to have to make a decision at some point when you start seeing organizations practice this habit as if it's just the everyday thing. It's not anymore, not in this modern NBA. And it may come to a point where he may have to step in and have to oversee organizations. It's not about affirmative action. It's about making sure that the ownership is taking heed on the direction of where the NBA is, and those owners are succinct about the way that they are laying out equitable opportunities for their coaches, for their players, for the staff. It leaves no stone unturned because, again, at the end of the day, the NBA is going to have to be the one that cleans this up, not the management.
I think we just have to be careful about, understanding of what the labor practices are, and we'd have to maybe go through like the NBA's HR documents a little bit here to kind of understand. Now, again, in this situation, it does seem like things were fixated and situated in a very particular way, for Mr. Finch. And I have no qualms against him. I mean, I think we just had Alvin Gentry on the show, and he's like, Alvin worked with Chris, previously, and was like, hey, that's a great coach. He's a good guy. He knows his stuff. So as you alluded to, we're not trying to discredit the qualifications of any person or any potential coach, but without necessarily knowing what the labor practices, what they are, and what teams needs to do to make sure equity and inclusion are a part of their hiring processes. It's hard for us to kind of maybe say, but this one, I said it was a little awkward. Hence, you saw the statements and the comments that were being made.
All right. One thing I do want to kind of get to, Shaw, before we finish up some of these, the rest of the news and notes that we have going on. What does it say about Ryan Saunders? This is Flip Saunders' son, right? Flip Saunders was a great head coach. And obviously, his passing impacted not just the league, but specifically the Minnesota Timberwolves. And so to part ways with Ryan Saunders in that kind of manner, I felt was a little off, right? And we're not talking about that. Maybe to the Minnesota community, they may be talking about it because Flip Saunders was revered. I mean, he was a part of the greatness in the career of Kevin Garnett. I mean, he stabilized and made sure that he was a part of that those years where the Minnesota Timberwolves were a viable team in the Western Conference. What does that say about where Ryan Saunders was as far as the relationship goes with the Minnesota Timberwolves and maybe with the Saunders family in the way that he was let go in this kind of manner?
Well, I mean, I don't know if it says a whole lot. I mean, you can draw a lot of conclusions about Ryan Saunders and, how good he is as a coach and where his future may be. Obviously, the relationship in Minnesota wasn't one that was tenable because they're not winning. They're not a winning franchise, even historically as such. So he was given a situation and given a hand that, sure, he made some mistakes. I think I was listening to another show and they were talking about, listen, if the Timberwolves have even 4 or 5 more wins, they're still well under 500, but he may still have his job. And they've been notorious for blowing leads late in fourth quarters and obviously in the second half in general, but they could blow an 8-point lead with like 4 minutes to go. And that just happened too many times. So how much of that is the personnel versus coaching? And I think in this aspect, ownership was like, well, those are coaching errors or not getting players to buy in. But remember, Cat's missed a bunch of time this year. D'Angelo Russell's missed a bunch of time this year. The two guys who they're building this franchise around have played, I think, a combined 5 or 6 games together since the trade of D'Angelo Russell last year. That's absurdity. It really is. As good as Malik Beasley has been and things of that nature, like the two guys you're building around haven't been able to play together. So how much of that is Ryan Saunders' fault? So I think for him, maybe it's best to just get out of this situation and whatever's going on in Minnesota and trying to find and catch on somewhere else.
All right, Shaw. All right, so let's go ahead and focus our attention on Kyrie Irving making some noise again. Well, maybe not so much noise. Maybe just reiterating some of the what has already been kind of thrown around there. Obviously, everybody's been impacted by the loss of Kobe Bryant. We just finished going through the year anniversary surrounding his passing with him and his daughter Gianna, and those that died in the helicopter crash out in California. So Kyrie Irving is proposing, and he is reiterating the proposal that the logo be changed to Kobe Bryant. Where are you with this particular issue, Shaw? Or I don't even want to say so much as an issue. This movement, so to speak, in order to see that the logo is changed with either the silhouette of a Kobe Bryant or Kobe Bryant itself.
So Kyrie's mantra, if you will, and maybe that's the wrong terminology, is that the league was built off the backs of black men. And while that statement holds some truth for sure, it's an interesting way to present it. And I think everybody is saddened by the loss of Kobe, and his daughter for sure. But I just don't know if a logo change to Kobe is the right move for the league right now. Especially you got to think about it from the business aspect. So I don't want to sit here and preach capitalism, but logo changes are not something that can happen instantaneously, especially, for a league like this. I don't know. I don't know who the MLB logo is. I think it's just a logo, right? It's not a person. The NFL doesn't have a silhouette or a person in their logo. I don't know what the NHL one is. Is that Bobby Orr or something? Like, I don't know. I want to speak, unintelligently about this. The NBA is the only league that I'm 100% okay. That's Jerry West, right? Like, and they made no bones about that. But to change that in a time during the pandemic where things are as insane as they are financially, I don't know what the proposal is. Is it something for 5 years? Is it immediate? I mean, I think the league could consider it, but I just don't see a pathway to that right now, knowing the financial implications that comes along with logo changing and all the branding and licensing that's already out there and agreements the league has already signed. What about you?
I don't care for it. It's not that I don't think it would be good. For me personally, I think that the NBA missed on the opportunity to utilize the logos if it was so important. From a licensing perspective, they could have utilized the logo of Michael Jordan, a silhouette of Michael Jordan to be in the NBA. Like, you could have basically done this for every generation. So Kobe Bryant was a part of a generation, and you could have had the logo done at that point too, when he was at the height of his career. The fact that we're doing this posthumous, to me, I just don't think it's good. I don't think it merits enough. I don't want to belittle the NBA and the logo itself and the importance of that. I just think that there are better things that we can use in order to not only properly ceremonialize Kobe Bryant and his legacy and what he gave to the game of basketball, but I think it would be a much more lasting impression. The NBA is always evolving, and I just think that in this space and time, just changing the logo to me doesn't. I mean, when do we ever really use the logo, Shaw? You know what I'm saying? Like, we know it's there, but we don't spend our time, unless we say that was Jerry West, of us talking about what the NBA logo is supposed to basically mean. The NBA is reflective of the players, and we want to see the players' faces. We want to see them in their particular pose. So what you're saying now is you're going to actually put a picture of Kobe Bryant on as the logo to the NBA. I just don't know if that makes any particular sense. The NBA created that logo. Let that be the logo. It's the silhouette. For Kobe Bryant, I think people want to genuinely see a face, and they want to see something that is reminiscent of what we saw as Kobe Bryant being a part of the NBA. I think that you can separate that and still be able to properly ceremonialize him the way that it is. And as far as where Kyrie Irving is coming from, I get it. But again, sometimes he just loses me in his train of thought and how he correlates that to what we're talking about here. I think it's two separate issues, and Kobe Bryant shouldn't be at the center of it simply because you do want the logo changed, and you're particularly picking him to be the person to be the face for that logo.
Yeah, I mean, good point. And like I said, I just needed to do something. Like, the NHL doesn't have a logo; it's just NHL and whatever in a shield looking thing. So the NBA, I think, is just, again, it's almost a victim of its own success in some ways and how they're doing things, because now everything becomes questionable. And would you change a logo each era? You know what I mean? So would LeBron get a chance, like, after he's retired, and Zion potentially, if he gets into that, that LeBron-ish type realm or whatever, I mean? Like, it's a weird thing. And while I don't want to discredit Kyrie's sentiment in terms of trying to recognize African-Americans' contribution to this sport specifically, I don't know if the logo is the way to go about it, and, trying to memorialize Kobe in a very unique way.
You want to memorialize Kobe Bryant in a right way? You put him, say, on a Mount Rushmore of the great two guards in the game, right? Like, we have Mount Rushmores for presidents. You could put a Mount Rushmore for Kobe Bryant in the conversation of great players. There's nothing wrong with doing something like that. I guess, to me, I just feel like what Kobe Bryant did give us, the logo, to me, I just feel like in this modern era, the way that players are marketing themselves, I think you take away from the essence of what Kobe Bryant meant by just basically slapping him on a silhouette logo type thing that the NBA does. I think it just takes away from it. And I don't want to see that happen for a great player like a Kobe Bryant. All right, y'all. Final news in the association that we're going to go over. DeMarcus Cousins, Glenn Robinson III. Both guys have been released. Both guys have cleared waivers. Any predictions of where you see them going?
Cousins has suitors, despite the reasons he left or was ousted in Houston, for his lack of defense. But Lakers, Clippers, kind of usual suspects. Dallas is showing some interest as well. One of the aggregate accounts is saying that Boston and Miami may have some interest there as well.
Some interest, right? Some interest.
Right. Yeah. I think if you're looking at Cousins, you have to have an elite level defense so that you can cover up the mistakes. I don't think if you're offensively, kind of potent, but don't have the chops defensively, that you can just throw more fire on the wood. I mean, more wood on the fire, rather, right? So you have to be a team that has some defensive principles if you're going to add DMC. I think with Glenn Robinson, it's similar, but he probably wouldn't play or need to play as prominent as a role as Cousins would coming into that situation, to whatever situation. So I think teams that are looking for some wing help can definitely use Glenn Robinson. And there's a couple teams. I mean, Boston is kind of one that sticks out to me because their wings are definitely bench wings are horrendous. But I feel like there's some other teams out there as well too, who could definitely look at him, particularly in the Eastern Conference. So even look at a team like Orlando, who we may not really know what they're doing, but they can definitely maybe use some help there too. So I think both guys are going to find a home before the season's out. But I think it's going to be very different for both of them.
Yeah, I mean, look, Cousins has proven that he at least is healthy, which I think is a good thing. I don't think anybody ever worries about the fact that he can give you something offensively. I think that the only thing that you have to worry about is whether or not you are positioning him where he could be susceptible to re-injuring himself again, and not just like minor injury. I'm talking severe injury, because that's just unfortunately been his bad luck. It's just interesting to me with Glenn Robinson III, because Glenn Robinson III to me has been a quality player, just doesn't seem to stay on the floor or the court long enough for us to really acknowledge or recognize what he can help give a team. So, it's hard to say. Like, his versatility, I think, will lend him to have essentially as many suitors as, say, a DeMarcus Cousins. To me, it's interesting that the teams that are actually interested in DeMarcus Cousins are teams that I don't know if whether or not they really necessarily need him as much as he would probably need to be with them, because they're the teams that are best suited to be positioned to make a run for a chip. But if I'm like the Miami Heat, if I am, the Boston Celtics, if I am the Milwaukee Bucks, I don't know why you're not maybe considering a guy like Boogie Cousins. I just, to me, I just think that you want that kind of extra firepower from your front court and add a little versatility. I would think someone like Brad Stevens especially should consider having a guy like that on your roster, because your productivity level from the front court position is severely lacking. And if nothing else, forget whether or not you're going to be good defensively. It's just a question of whether or not you're going to be able to score the basketball, and maybe just relying only on Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum is not going to be good enough, because you don't know what you're getting from Kemba Walker, unfortunately, this season, and you don't know whether or not that's going to improve anytime soon. At least you can rely on maybe getting some additional front court scoring until your back court is at a place where you can consistently rely on them on those tough stretches where you're competing now to reposition yourself to be viable for a run in this year's upcoming playoffs. So it's so much to go into and so much to discuss, but that is a separate conversation, and I'm sure it'll be had when we finally figure out where Boogie Cousins and Glenn Robinson III lands. All right, that's it, man. I mean, those are the news and notes, and so much. I told you, man, we had a lot to get into here. But now we are going to get into our conversation in regards to the Toronto Raptors. Is this team for real, or are they on the brink of extinction? You'll find out when we discuss this here on The Breakdown.
Yes, I booked it. And just like that, you finally booked that break with free cancellation at Booking.com. So where are you dreaming of? The fresh air of the ocean? Or maybe it's the mountains that are calling. When you're ready, just go to Booking.com or check out the app and filter by places offering free cancellation. Booking is easy. And if something comes up, change your plans and book for another time. Hassle-free. Book your stay today with Booking.com. Terms apply. Available at selected properties. Yes, I booked it. And just like that, you finally booked that break with free cancellation at Booking.com. So where are you dreaming of? The fresh air of the ocean? Or maybe it's the mountains that are calling. When you're ready, just go to Booking.com or check out the app and filter by places offering free cancellation. Booking is easy, and if something comes up, change your plans and book for another time, hassle-free. Book your stay today with Booking.com. Terms apply, available at selected properties.
Time to break it down. Time now for the breakdown. Cal Lee Warren Shaw, the baseline. You know how we do, baby, man. We got to talk about those teams that are on that come up. The Toronto Raptors have had a very interesting season. They did not start this season off well at all. And I think a lot of people probably wondered this was probably going to be a throwaway season. If you are Nick Nurse, you're probably, again, re-cementing yourself as why you're one of the top coaches in the NBA, because somehow he has figured out to get this basketball team, one, at 500 as we're recording this show, but more importantly, to be a team that legitimately is competing on a level that reaffirms that they are going to be considered as a possible contender in the East. And let's not let it be misunderstood. The Toronto Raptors, when they are in the playoffs, have the numbers of the Milwaukee Bucks. They have got the numbers of the Philadelphia 76ers, and you can make the argument they've got the number of all of the top teams that would be in consideration in the Eastern Conference. So why is it now we're wondering if whether or not, regardless of all of that, that this team may be on the brink of extinction? That as much as we're buying into this team's success in recent weeks, that they may not be able to sustain and hold that. And I think it's an interesting question that you're bringing up, Shaw, because their roster has not completely turned over that much with the loss of maybe Marc Gasol. I do think, though, do you trust the Pascal Siakams? Do you trust the Fred VanVleets? And with Kyle Lowry possibly being on the T block, you have to start thinking to yourself, will the Toronto Raptors be buyers, sellers, or will they maintain?
Who the hell knows what Masai is thinking over there? And the awkwardness of this season.
The Messiah?
Toronto's probably
never question the Messiah.
But, I mean, he's also facing a contract extension that hasn't come yet. So that's going to be something that they got to figure out. I believe that's at the end of this year. But the Raptors have been the weirdest of the weirds in a season that has just been insane to understand and comprehend. First of all, being displaced from Toronto to become the Tampa Raptors. So all that impacted, I think, the way they played. Even the coaches, like anything, like they were all just unsettled by virtue of not being in their home market on a regular basis and having to find homes in Tampa for the season, right? Like it's a strange situation to deal with, and that impacts how your routine is on a day-to-day basis. Aaron Baines signing hasn't really worked out all that great. Chris Boucher's played well coming off the bench, and we'll get to him a little bit more. But as you alluded to, just who are these Raptors? So this 500 team, as you allude to, as we record right now, was one of the worst teams in the Eastern Conference, but the Eastern Conference is bad. So how do you truly assess yourself based on how bad the conference actually is and versus where you truly have title hopes? I think what brings me to this question and why we're discussing it today is, well, this Kyle Lowry thing comes up, and while he's still a Toronto Raptor today, they've reportedly is like, well, if he wants to go, they want to trade him to a contender and somewhere where he wants to go. They want to kind of give him the Westbrook treatment, and that OKC did. Like, hey, where do you want to go? And they'll figure it out. So the Philadelphia, where he's from, came up, and then outside and going back to go play with Kawhi and Serge, those options came up. Maybe Miami's an option as well too. So I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, what do you think this is? Because 2 weeks ago, they're talking about trying to trade for Andre Drummond. 2 weeks later, they're potentially trading Kyle Lowry. Which one is it? You know what I mean? Are we trying to stay relevant, or are we moving on from what used to be?
Listen, this is the fluctuation of the NBA right now, right? And maybe while we're so fixated on the contracts and we're so fixated on where the team is financially, I think the bigger point is let's just kind of look at the numbers. The Toronto Raptors, Shaw, are still a top 10 offensive and a top 15 defensively as far as ratings go. They're still top 10 defensively, and they're still basically top 15 offensively. So this is basically a middle-of-the-road team. Now, I'm sure that the numbers have fluctuated recently because they have improved so much, but I think that's the point. I think the point is we've talked about this with guys like VanVleet and Pascal Siakam and Anunoby. they're not going to hit you with these guys are going to be the Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum type that we have already been rolling out over the last few seasons because of how quickly they've risen in stardom and their profile faces representing out of their draft. All of the guys that we've just mentioned here from Toronto are like guys that we talk about like in, coming out of the G League, right? Or our reclamation or projects, right? And have suddenly established themselves to be legitimate, like to establish themselves to be stars. And it's kind of interesting because this is what tends to happen with teams that are representing the northern part of North America, right? Like it's almost like they've been banished out there and they're doing big things. And then you put them in the bigger picture of what the US represents as far as the NBA goes. And they're just like, oh yeah, they're not on the LeBron level. They're not on the Anthony Davis level. The Giannis's don't seem to still get that same kind of respect. Like we still question the fact that he was a 2-time MVP. And I feel like we're doing the same thing with the Pascal Siakams, the Fred VanVleets, and OG Anunobys. Individually, they are probably not going to be on that level that we consider the superstars of the NBA. But collectively, when their mind is right, and maybe this is where Nick Nurse is the Professor X going on right now, he is mentally tapped in to get these guys to raise their game, and collectively they are helping make the Toronto Raptors a viable basketball team. So even if with this slow start, kind of it is like, don't sleep on the fact that they will eventually figure out a way to be good enough to remind us of how competitive this team has been the last 3 years.
They are that. And I think it's how much do you pull back from the past and make that a part of your present and future. And that's the hardest decision, I think, for right now. 34-year-old Kyle Lowry, whose contract is up at the end of the season. So do you make him a Raptor lifer and then, sign him to team friendly-ish type deals, pay him for his time, but, make it cap flexible for you moving forward? Or do you send him off into the sunset? I don't think this Raptors team is a title contender, even in the Eastern Conference. Like they can get to be even where they're at as a 4 or 5 seed. I think I picked them at 6, and obviously that can still happen with the fluctuation in the Eastern Conference right now. Nobody saw the Knicks coming. All 5 Atlantic teams are currently in the playoff picture as we record, that's absurd. But seeing where Toronto was is like it's hard to understand. Let's talk a little bit about their contract. So we talked about Lowry, right? OG's contract kicks in next year at $16 million, per. Do you want to? Norman Powell's making 11 with all the injuries and things they've sustained. Norman Powell's having a pretty decent season, putting up 18 to 22 points a game here in nights and scoring 30 on some nights as well. So Norman Powell might opt out of his player option at $11 million. And then do you want to have to pay Norman Powell $17, $18 million to keep him if that's what the going market is going to be for him? Or does he opt into that 11 because maybe he's just not that good? I don't know. There's so many questions, I think, with this Raptors team. And I'm of the ilk that if you're not at the level to be a title contender, then you got to start making the moves to do that. And while they're not going to full on tear this down because Siakam, VanVleet, and Anunoby are owed big deals and still relatively in their primes, I think moving Lowry is the move to try to maybe get you a couple picks or maybe some young talent that you can try to build along VanVleet and Siakam and Anunoby and see how you can potentially grow into that. And if you're Masai, you feel good about your talent evaluation. You feel good about even your G League team who's giving you some great players in that too. What does Boucher ultimately become? And see if you can grow your roster into that. So I think the Raptors are heading for a mid-build, but I think it starts with potentially moving on from Lowry and maybe even a guy like Norman Powell, who I don't know how, if you want to pay him at the number he may ultimately command.
I think you actually hit the nail on the head, Shaw, because the Toronto Raptors represent a very unique way that organizations tend to thrive in transitions, whether or not they want to maintain championship aspirations or they just completely want to tear shit down and just start that quote-unquote rebuild process. You use the word mid-build. And the Toronto Raptors, I feel like, are one of the few teams, if not the only team, that has been able to successfully adopt that kind of mentality. Because let's not forget, that kind of quote-unquote mid-build is what essentially put them in the position for them to make that championship run when they got rid of DeMar DeRozan and got Kawhi Leonard. Like they basically pushed all the chips in on the idea that while everyone thinks that this was it, there's no way that the Raptors can ever get around, even if LeBron James is out there, from Cleveland to Los Angeles, that was their window. That they figured out a way to say, all right, we're just going to settle in on being a good basketball team, having DeMar DeRozan and Kyle Lowry, and at the expense of recognizing that the relationship maybe with Lowry and Ujiri is going to be compromised with regards to moving his best friend to another team, they went and they got Kawhi Leonard, right? And what happened? They went and won a championship. So to me, this is one of the few organizations that actually properly buys into the idea of doing a true mid-build, where you don't have to gut the team completely because you still see the potential of what the team does. Like at the core values is still centered around what the coach wants this team to do. And you can still replace certain players, maybe even improve the team's roster and the strength of what makes them as good as a basketball team by putting players in there and accompanying them with good coaching and already some solid play that you already have. That to me is indicative of what we've seen from the Toronto Raptors over the last few years. And I think we're trending again back in that direction where should it surprise you that Kyle Lowry probably does get moved if they recognize that what they're getting in return is going to propel them to be as equally competitive as the Brooklyn Nets, as the Philadelphia 76ers in a 7-game series, in that kind of ilk. I'm not putting it past the Toronto Raptors because they're the only ones that have proven that they can pull this type of thing off, because all the other teams don't seem to know or can't do that without us recognizing that they're just going to completely overshoot their shot and miss out.
I agree, but I challenge it in one caveat. I don't think that would be a this year thing. I think the Lowry thing would be something that allows this team to potentially develop into a title contender maybe next year or the year after that, depending on what the pieces are. I don't think there's a player out there right now that Lowry can trade. They can trade Lowry for, then bring somebody back now, especially at 34. So they'd be trying to get young assets and then maybe a couple picks to add to build their roster and build it out for the future. So that's what makes the Andre Drummond sniffing around thing like perplexing to me. I know they need a center. Baines hasn't worked out. Boucher, as much as I've kind of clamored for him to get more minutes in the starting role, he hasn't thrived. He's been great coming off the bench. He's put up his best numbers off the bench. So he may just need to stay in that role now and to remain comfortable. But they do need a center, but I don't think Andre Drummond is the answer. So for me,
I agree with you. I agree with you there. But I think what I'm saying is that if the intent is that because if you really look at it, Kyle Lowry with his 18 points per game, third best player scoring wise on this team, he's not like the center point. He's probably the nucleus. Like his attributes are going to help this basketball team in other ways to allow them to be competitive as far as in the playoffs go. But if you're basically making a play to bring a guy like Andre Drummond, who we just said is basically like an all-star kind of player, you are basically saying, hey, we are not trying to sell off on the idea that in the next 2-3 years will eventually be where they are right now. You're still hoping that whoever it is that you're moving, if obviously to your point, not this year, but maybe next year, being around this team, they're going to be one of the upper echelon teams in the Eastern Conference again. And that to me is what I think about when I think mid-build, because you're not trading down up on the gamble. You're basically trading at in order to be able to maintain or elevate. It's not with the intent to say, all right, we're putting a 3-5 year plan in place, knowing that you gave up important assets that's made this team good. This team is going to stay good as long as they don't give away the farm. But when have we ever seen Masai do that?
Well, yeah, and I think that's my point too, is that, even in a Lowry trade where that gets them assets that they can immediately use and try to quickly develop, VanVleet, Siakam, and Anunoby are good enough to keep this team afloat, especially with the coaching of Nick Nurse and everything that's this Raptors organization is made of. And interestingly enough, like it would never happen because they wouldn't do this to Lowry. But a Lowry for Drummond trade straight up works, financially. Like they can make that work. But what is Cleveland doing with Lowry? They would immediately, send him off somewhere else and try to ship him, whatnot like that. So I just don't know if that's what Toronto ultimately wants to do, with the Drummond situation, or if they're trying to bring Drummond and keep Lowry and then send out Powell and some expirings and things of that nature. Like there's things that can happen here. But I think Toronto's best bit is to understand, hey, will still be competitive. They'll still be a playoff team, presumably. But like I said, I just move on from Lowry now and see what's out there before it just expires and you can't do anything over the summer.
All right, Shaw. So we're talking about this Toronto Raptors team in its context that they're going to be competitive. We don't know whether or not they're good. Obviously, we're saying that they're right now constructed, not going to be good enough to beat what we're already seeing from teams like the Brooklyn Nets, 76ers, the Bucks, and those particular teams. What do you think needs to happen with guys like Norman Powell and Chris Boucher as far as how they can help this basketball team be as competitive? Like, if you're Nick Nurse, what would you expect and need from those guys as far as contributions go?
I think they're getting it, honestly. Boucher in the reserve role he's thriving there. So I think you need to keep him there and normalize that and figure out if there's a cheaper, more equitable center that you can bring in to play ahead of him, even if Boucher is a guy, who finishes games. The thing about Boucher is he's kind of a new name. He's 28 years old, right? He's older than Siakam. He's older than Powell. And, what I mean? He's not a young dude, but he's coming into his own now, kind of in the latter stages, of his NBA prime, if you will. But I still think he just needs development off the bench. And as I alluded to, Powell's given them great minutes. I was deathly afraid for the Celtics in last year's playoffs of Norman Powell, what he was going to do. I kept waiting for the Norman Powell breakout game. It just didn't happen in that series. He's having a very good season this year, plugging in and playing minutes, especially with Anunoby being out for a good majority of the year. The Lowry's had a couple of, minor injuries, and now the team is dealing with some COVID situations with Siakam as well. In addition to the whole coaching staff is now going to be out, throughout the All-Star game with COVID protocols. So Powell, I think, is giving them what they need as a guy who can slash, hit the corner threes, but is explosive, at times offensively. Is physical enough at times defensively, maybe a little bit too physical in terms of his basketball IQ there, here and there. But overall, I think they're getting what they want out of those guys. It's, do they have enough overall depth with like Malachi Flynn and Bembry and even Terrence Davis? Like, all those guys really see spot minutes right now. I think they're really kind of ruling out like a top 8, top 9 rotation, and Nick Nurse has made it work with that. All
right, Shaw, before we close things out here, I know that you had a couple of highlight points regarding Van Fleet and Pascal Siakam. And you were indicating, hey, is Fred Van Fleet worth every single dollar that they paid out to him in this offseason? I have to probably say, given the circumstances and what the expectations were from him coming from the bench to what he's giving them in starting minutes, he's been doing a pretty adequate job. I think the bigger question will be can it get better from here?
That has me tongue-tied. I'm not a historical believer in point guards of Van Vliet's size having sustained success. So I think this is probably peak Van Vliet, and it's very good. So I think he's worth every dollar that he's been awarded. I don't know if there's another level.
You're giving him the Jameer Nelson treatment, bro. Like, goodness. Okay.
But he's He's actually a pretty good defender for his size, and he's physical. He gets his hands are always in the passing lanes and stripping guys and things. He's active on that side, so he's not a complete liability. But I don't think we're going to see Van Vliet like have an Isaiah Thomas like season, where he's averaging 30 a game and 7. I don't think that. I think maybe he can get to 22 a game and kind of the same numbers, 6, 7 assists, 5 rebounds, which is damn good. That's really, really, really good. But if you're looking for Van Vliet to take like an MVP type leap, like Isaiah Thomas did, a couple years ago with Boston, I don't see that coming. So I think they're getting what they need to get out of them. And that's what the going market is, for players, that put out this type of production. And same thing with Siakam. They understand he's not the lead guy that you just throw the ball to and say, hey, go get me a basket. He's not that guy. So I think in this role with the complementary pieces that are around them, and obviously the ascension of Van Vliet into kind of his role, that's helped Siakam kind of normalize into kind of like, hey, good player, all-star caliber type player on a good team. 20 points, 7, 8 rebounds, 5 assists, extremely good numbers, right? But he's not a superstar, and I think we all recognize that now.
All right. Well, there you have it, man. I mean, I am of the mindset that these guys are solid players. I think that they will get better. To your point, I don't think that they will eclipse, maybe to some degree, the commonplace thought that we have of guys in their position, like where they play on the court, that they're going to be as great as the greats. But I certainly think that collectively they can certainly be a formidable combination that can help make this Toronto Raptors team a successful basketball team sustainably for the next few years. And maybe that's where it starts. They figured out a way for them to be relevant in at times when it seems like an irrelevant conference in the East, right? And I think as long as they continue to keep that chatter, we just have to be mindful of what kind of expectations I think we're setting on them. I agree with you where Siakam is not having a solid season, but he's still putting up adequate numbers. And I think maybe for the Toronto fan base and the Toronto organization, what he's doing for that basketball team is plenty enough if they're going to still be in the conversations of competing against the top teams in the Eastern Conference. I think the question is going to be can he be what we hope or try to anticipate him being? In the days of the Giannis Antetokounmpos, everybody wants Pascal Siakam to be like that kind of guy for them, right? So it'll be interesting to see if he can put himself in that place. I'm of the hopeful that he can be, because I've just seen the raw talent from him. It's just a question of whether or not it all just falls into place for him. The kid, again, only 26, so he's got a few years left before we start questioning the prime of his career. And whether or not what that's going to mean for the Toronto Raptors, respectively, in the Eastern Conference. Awesome show altogether, Shaw. And again, man, this has been so much going on. We're supposed to actually be kind of like trickling it down a little bit because they're getting towards All-Star, but not in this NBA climate right now.
Yeah, you said it, bro. There's just too much happening. So we got to keep pushing and keep grinding, stay with the baseline as we navigate the NBA paradigm and everything that happens, with this insane season. Again, I just can't say enough how unique times are right now and everything that's being taken into the equation of the NBA life, if you will. So couldn't do it without you, as always. And I'm excited to bring this show to our fans and listeners each and every week. Look to see what we have in store next week as the NBA turns, bro. It's like a soap opera.
It's like the soap opera as the NBA turns. Nice. I like it. All right, guys. Once again, we appreciate each and every single one of you guys hopping on board with us. For the baseline, Callie, Warren, Shaw. We appreciate you guys. Enjoy NBA All-Star. I'm sure we will be talking about it at some point, and we'll catch up with you next time.